Hi, this is Alexis, back for week 7 of the front-end bootcamp for week 4 of JavaScript. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started here. So in this first problem here, I created an array called ages, and these square brackets are the data with the various index points. I created my first equation here, subtracting the last value in the array the first value in the array at index point 0 from the last value in the array using this array length. And then it logs out the value over here. This next one, I'm pushing the value of 35 to the end of the array, the ages array, and doing another subtraction, producing this value. Down here I created a loop with the conditions of I starting at 0, and then as long as I is less than or equal to the total length of the array or the amount of objects in the array, it will continue incrementing through the array, looping through it. And basically what it's doing is it's just adding each of those values to each other as it's looping. And then finally it's logging down here the total that's obtained from this equation and then dividing it by the total length of the array, the total amount of values that are contained in there, basically giving an average of the array. This one I'm going to breeze over because it's basically the same thing as above, but instead of there being numerical values inside of the array, there's a bunch of strings, name values, and same thing here, looping through the array, getting an average by dividing the value produced in here by the total length of the array, and then logging out that value, 4.6 over here in the console. And then over here, I created another loop that basically concatenates all of those strings contained in the array to one another, and then logging them out over here. You can see the strings. Answered a few questions there. Now for a new array called name length that is empty here between these square brackets, I created another loop to loop through the array, and what this one is doing is it's getting the length of the names inside of the names array, each of those values in there. It's counting how many string values there are in each of those indices, and it's pushing the total value into this name lengths array, and then it's logging out each of these as it loops through. So over here we can see 353, which in that previous array it's using, it was Sam 3, Tommy 5, etc. You get the point. So it's now contained in this new name lengths array. Over here we have a new loop that I made, looping through the array of name lengths, and all it's doing here is summing up the various lengths of the inside of the names, and then it's logging those out. So it's the total sum of all of the values that we copied out over here. Alright, in this function, okay, now we're making a little pivot into functions. So here I'm initializing this function with this function keyword, and this function is called this function quite creatively, and it has two parameters of word and n. And then in here I created a loop to go to be looping through this function that I've created as long as the I is less than the value that's passed in as n. So as it's looping through, what it's doing is whatever you typed in as the word, whatever's being passed in as word, it's going to add it to itself n number of times, and then when it's done looping through, when it basically reaches the value of n, it returns the result of that. So in this example I used hello with an n value of 3. These were passed into these parameters, and then it's logged down here. The function's being called here. This function, here's the two parameters. And if we look over here in the console box, hello, hello, hello. So that one ran correctly. Now in this function called full name with two parameters, first name and last name, that are defined up above here, for the example, it's basically creating this full name and what it's doing is concatenating the first and last name that are passed into this function with a space between them, and then returning that full name. And we're console logging that out. So with our example of Sergio Perez, we can see this down here. Now in this function, calculate, we have one value or one parameter which is supposed to be an array in this situation, and here's another for loop calculating through this array, basically looping through it. And what this one is doing is getting the total value that's contained in the array. It's adding up all of the values that are contained at each of the index points. And if the total value of all of these points added together is greater than or equal to 100, it will return true. And then I didn't define it if it's not true, but I used the ages array, called the function calculate, and passed in the ages array, and sure enough, as you can see over here, it's a value of true. So on to the next one. This function is calculate average, which is what it sounds like. It's calculating the average of an array that's passed in, again looping through, and it's just adding each value of the array, and then it's the same as above. It just has this extra calculation here where the initial value that's gathered from the sum of that, all the values in the array, is being divided by the total array length, and that's producing the average, and it's returning this average value that's defined. And here I am calling the function, passing in the ages array, and then over here we can see it's 33.125. This one's a little more complicated, but the same idea. I created a new array called lucky numbers, and here's all of the values defined inside of it. Created this function compare array with the parameters of array 1 and array 2, looping through the array, adding. So we're doing the same thing as above, getting an average of this array. Then down here we're getting an average of the second array, and then at the very bottom it says if the average value of array 1 is greater than the average value of array 2, then it will return true, and if not, it'll return false. So here I'm calling this function compare array, passing in the ages array and the lucky numbers array, and then what we get here is false. So ages is not, the total value of ages is not greater than the total value of the lucky numbers array. And then finally we have a function using more Boolean, it's using a Boolean value. Here's the variables define the function will buy drink with the two parameters is hot outside and money in pocket, and it's just an if statement. If it's hot outside is true and the money in pocket is greater than or equal to 1050, it will return true, and if otherwise, if these conditions, both of these aren't met, it'll return false. And here I'm calling the function and passing in these two parameters, which you can see for hot outside I put true, money in pocket $20, which it meets both of these conditions, therefore it logs out true. Alright, thanks a lot.